forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. From the very beginning, the two gods, Baal and Ashtoreth, or Ishtar, were linked together. The connection reappears later on in the book of Judges. Then the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths. It appears as well in the book of 1 Samuel, when the people realized the consequences of their apostasy. Then they cried out to the Lord and said, "We have sinned, because we have forsaken the Lord and served the Baals and Ashtoreths." The Baal-Ashtoreth connection. Why are the two joined together? The fact that they could be portrayed in their mythologies as married or as lovers would account for some of it, but the connection between the two gods is deeper and one that transcends mythology. So too is the order in which their names appear. It is Baal who is first and then Ashtoreth. Israel first turned to Baal and then to Ashtoreth. Baal leads to Ashtoreth. Baal represented the nations turning away from God and to the physical, the material, the carnal, and the sensual. It was this that opened the door for the entrance of Ashtoreth, or Ishtar, and with it, unbridled sexuality, licentiousness, and decadence. The worship of Baal had elements of all these things, but Ashtoreth was their incarnation. The one god ushered in the other, and the one spirit the next. The god of the apostasy ushered in the goddess of sexual licentiousness and debauchery. Ishtar comes to America. What would this mean for America and the West? If America's turning from God began to manifest in the early 1960s, and, with it, the entrance of Baal, we would then expect this to be followed by the entrance of Ashtoreth or Ishtar. And what would then happen in the wake of that entrance? We would expect a transformation to begin that would alter the realm of sexuality. With the goddess's entrance, we would expect biblical standards and ethics surrounding sexuality and marriage to begin to erode. We would expect the moral foundations and values that had undergirded Western civilization for nearly 2,000 years to begin overturning. In short, we would expect there to be a revolution in the realm of sexuality, a sexual revolution. Ishtar and the sexual revolution. And that is exactly what took place. Shortly after America's turning from God began manifesting in the early 1960s, another transformation took place in the realm of sexuality. It would be one of the central defining movements of the 1960s, and it would continue long after the decade was over. It would not stop until it had transformed American and Western culture beyond recognition. The effect of the goddess's return to America could be summed up in 3 words: the sexual revolution. There had been another sexual revolution. It took place in ancient times in the Greco-Roman world. It was the revolution by which biblical sexual ethics, ideals, and morality replaced those of the pagan world. It happened at the same time the gods were cast out of Western civilization. The two phenomena were connected. The casting out of the gods included the casting out of the Roman Venus, the Greek Aphrodite, the Phoenician Astarte, and the Mesopotamian Ishtar, all the varied manifestations of the goddess of sexuality. It was in the goddess's departure that biblical values replaced pagan ones, and the first sexual revolution took place. But if the goddess should return, it would mean that pagan sexual values would now overturn biblical ones. In other words, the sexual revolution that took place in America and Western civilization in the late 20th century was the reversing of the sexual revolution that took place in ancient times. It was the advent of the gospel that broke the goddess's spell. But now, upon her return, the spell would be cast again on America, the West, and the world. The spell of the sorceress. The sexual revolution was another dimension of the paganization of America and Western civilization. The values it represented were pagan values, and the sexuality was pagan sexuality. What was branded as the new morality was in actuality an old morality, an ancient morality, the morality of the gods. The reappearance of that morality was a sign that the departed spirits had returned to the house. The aim of the goddess was to destroy the morality and faith by which she was expelled. To do that, she would have to take a Christian nation and civilization that, with regard to sexuality and marriage, upheld biblical morality and practices, and lead it into embracing pagan morality and practices. To do that, as with the return of Baal, She would have to work incrementally, step by step, and progressively. But it was the spirit of Ishtar, and to Ishtar especially belonged the powers of seduction and spells. So in recasting her ancient spell, she would begin the seduction of America and the modern world. What would it mean if America were to come under the spell of an ancient goddess? Chapter 19. The Great Seduction. What exactly would happen if the spirit of the goddess took possession of a culture? What would happen if it took possession of America? And then came Ishtar. In the American and Western culture of the mid-20th century, sexuality was seen as the sacred domain of marriage, and marriage as the sacred and lifelong covenant of love between a husband and wife. These values were largely the same as they had been in ancient times at the advent of Christianity. Sex outside of marriage, whether premarital or extramarital, was seen as sin. Divorce was frowned upon. If a woman became pregnant before marriage, she and the child's father were expected to marry. The divorce rate was minuscule. So was the percentage of people living together outside of marriage, as was the rate of children born out of wedlock. Prostitution existed but was illegal and confined to the underworld. Pornography was taboo, and for the most part kept out of mainstream culture and public view. Even those who broke such standards would, for the most part, keep their behavior private. American entertainment and popular culture were expected to uphold the same values. Beyond allusion and suggestion, sexual relations were generally not depicted on the movie screen. Hollywood was expected to follow an agreed-upon code of morality as to what could and could not be shown, and it did. Nudity of any kind was forbidden. Any allusion to sex outside of marriage was not to be portrayed in a positive light, and for television screens the parameters were even tighter. And then came Ishtar. The deification of sex. We have seen the dynamic of deification. When an individual, nation, or civilization turns away from God, that which is not God will become as God and will assume the aura of godhood. One of those things that are not God is sex. When Israel turned away from God, sex, in the form of the goddess Ashtoreth or Ishtar, was deified. Sex became a god. Sex thus became an end and a goal to be pursued in and of itself. Therefore, it could now be divorced from marriage or any other context and be followed with no regard for context or any other thing. When the spirit of Ishtar came to America, the same dynamics began to replay. Sexuality was deified. It became a god to be pursued, as an end in and of itself, and without regard to marriage, love, or even a relationship. That which was once the exclusive domain of husband and wife now spilled into the public sphere and popular culture. And so began the progressive severing of sexuality from marriage. As Israel worshipped and served the goddess of sexuality, so now America, indwelled by the same spirit and the same goddess,